And Trinity, I just wanted to take a minute.
This meeting is being recorded.
I just have to take a minute to introduce Delphine Naughton, who I've also brought from Mid-Fairfield Child Guidance as well. She's on.
Thank you very much. All right, so to get us started, questions will go kind of broken down by age. So each panelist will answer and we go from there. So the first question, how do I know what to look out for in terms of possible mental health concerns with my child? What are some warning signs that may be helpful to know if they need help?
Did you want me to start?
Yeah, I guess Gail will have you go first. Thank you.
So, hello, everyone. My name is Gail Melanson. I'm the Executive Director of Mid-Fairfield Community Care Center. So I can talk kind of generally a little bit, and then when we talk about specifically for younger children, so we're going to kind of talk about younger children, and then more middle-aged to adolescents, and then, you know, if there's any adults comments and questions, we'll do that as well. So generally speaking, we look at how individuals are functioning in all areas of development. So how, if it's a child or an adult, how are they doing in school or work? How are they functioning in terms of their social functioning? How are they doing with their relationships? So when you're looking at, is it something that should be concerned? Everyone experiences ranges in how they're functioning. So everyone at different times feels anxious, feels sad. You know, there's hyperactivity. Kids are hyperactive at different points in time. But what you're really looking at is it impacting their functioning? Is it persistent? So did they have a bad day? Did they have a bad week? Or is it something that seems to be persisting and seems different from their functioning prior? So those would be the areas. And with younger children, you're really looking at frustration tolerance is a big one for little ones. So are they getting more frustrated than normal? Are they really having trouble regulating their emotions? And again, how difficult are these challenges they're having? Are they impacting? Are you getting calls from school saying they're really struggling? How long has it persisted? Is it related to an event? So really looking at all of those things to determine whether or not more support is needed.
Great, thank you very much. Would either Frank or Donna like to speak about adolescence?
Sure. So when it comes to adolescence, you know, obviously it's a fine line, right? It's a hard, almost a dance with working with adolescents, because some adolescents are very vocal and will come to you and talk to you. Some adolescents will do the extreme opposite and not come and talk, right? You know, the biggest thing in terms of seeing adolescent symptoms in terms of suicide awareness, you know, is very similar in the term of, are they stopping what they love to do? Are they starting to isolate? You know, and especially in terms of their social as well as their activities that they do, right? So for adolescents, it's very, you know, it's very important for you as parent or as a caregiver to remember to kind of set aside your own emotions on things and kind of create an opening for your child or your adolescent. You know, if you see signs that your child's health is under threat, just tune in, right? Maybe they're having a bad day, but, you know, signs of mental health troubles last for weeks. You know, it's important to not to just assume that it's like kind of a passing mood or just like something that they're dealing with, right? It's important to kind of be aware of how their daily life has gone, right? Have they increased isolation? Have they lost a passion for activities? Have you found them being disconnected from either the home life or their peer life, their friend life? Difficulty in school, right? If looking at the grades or the behaviors, tuning into their teachers, tuning into their workers at school to kind of see how they just present at school. Do they seem disconnected at school, right? Especially because they could seem disconnected at home, and that can be kind of normal. But if they start to disconnect from school or peers or activities, that is when it's, you know, you can see that there's a little bit more risk here, as well as risky behaviors and more impulsivity from your teen. right? So just kind of be kind of observant of the day-to-day, as well as, like I said earlier, it's important to kind of set aside our own emotions to allow us to have room to internalize our teen's emotions or what our teen is trying to convey or communicate to us.
And Trinity, thank you, Frank. I just wanted to piggyback onto what Frank said. Hi, everybody. My name is Donna Fletcher, and I'm the Director of Co-occurring Treatment Programs at the Child and Family Guidance Center, serving CF Region 1 and 5. So I totally ditto on what Gail and Frank had said. I think with adolescents, you want to look for change, and it could be a sudden change. And one thing I'd like to note is sometimes these suicidal thoughts come out of the blue. So they don't necessarily have to have a pre-existing mental health issue. It could be, you know, as Gail, I think, mentioned, an event. So you want to really be in tune with what's going on in the lives of your adolescents. It could be, you know, somebody might have done some cyberbullying. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm not necessarily in tune to that. My kids are all older, but, you know, really be in tune to what's going on in their network, so to speak, their online networks. The other thing I think is to really be listening to what they say. You know, if a youth expresses hopelessness, like they don't know how they can get through the day, or they want to just be somewhere on an island, you know, what does that really mean? So really pick up on what your youth is saying. And I think as Frank said, you know, spend that time with your youth to just kind of check in and see what else is really going on. And kids are, you know, very, especially at that age, they may be very impulsive, but that's all it takes is, you know, an act of one time feeling like, you know, the world is ending, and that could end a life. My specialty is substance use treatment, and there's a high incidence of suicidality, substance use. If your youth is, you know, suddenly going out at night and hanging out with kids you don't know, maybe smoking, doing cocaine, I think the incidence is like 1 in 3. I was just reading this not long ago, of suicides of adolescents are connected to substance using behaviors. So be mindful of that, and obviously keep meds away that you know, or if they're ordering things on the internet, like kind of be aware of whatever things they might be thinking of using to self-harm. And you know, we know cutting happens. Doesn't necessarily mean that kids want to kill themselves, but it could mean a bigger message to us. So looking at those behaviors and really trying to be there for them. Well, thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question for our panelist, which you sort of already covered, but how do I know what is appropriate developmental behavior for my child, or when should I be more concerned?
Right. So I think we did talk about that. One of the things, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to another question because I think it's relevant here. Many people are afraid to talk about suicide with your children because people are afraid they're going to put the idea in someone's head. And that is not true. If someone is thinking about suicide, or even if someone is thinking about suicide, talking about it is only going to help them. And I'll let Delphine piggyback on what I'm saying. And if someone is not considering suicide, bringing it up is not all of a sudden going to give them the idea that they should try to kill themselves. So making sure that you're talking about it, that it can be talked about, and if they're having those feelings, that they should feel like they should be able to talk about it. Young children may not always be able to articulate it as well. Teens, a lot of the teens, it's actually very common that they're hearing this language, whereas little ones may not be hearing this language. So they may just say things like, you know, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go to sleep and not wake up, those type of things. So, and trying to understand what their intent is. Delphine, did you want to add anything?
I was going to say, with adolescents and even with younger adolescents, it's really important to use the words, just because, you know, a lot of times people shy away from the word. And so they'll say like, oh, have you thought of like hurting yourself? But that could mean a million different things. And so it's really important to be specific and to ask, have you thought about suicide? Have you thought about killing yourself? And then kind of going into, if there's yes to any of those questions, kind of delving deeper into that.
And just to kind of piggyback off of what Delphine and Gail were saying, even if your child is not experiencing, or if you don't feel like your child's experiencing, you can even open up the conversation around their friends and say, hey, how are your friends doing? And sometimes the adolescent or your child will be a little more comfortable talking about somebody else instead of themselves. And then you as a parent or a guardian can kind of bring that conversation back to your child. Right. So trying to think about a different avenue if you don't feel like just, you're getting what you feel like is what your child's trying to convey to you. So, tuning into your child's peers is also a really good avenue to trying to start that conversation. But I can't, stress how important it is for us as guardians and parents to, really work on breaking down that stigma around mental health in general, but even more specifically around suicide awareness, because that's what we're trying to do, right? It's about bringing awareness and being preventative instead of reactive. So this is a good way to kind of get down that alley a little bit in trying to open up that conversation with your child.
And just to add,
go ahead, Don.
Sorry. No, I think knowing your children's friends, certainly what else is going on with them. If somebody else has suicidal thoughts, it's sadly, I think it can often be contagious. So you want to really kind of, especially among teens, it's a kind of way that kids even bond. Depressed kids tend to gravitate towards depressed kids. It's strange, but true. So you really want to know, and also be there, talk to them, validate what they're feeling, acknowledge that, hey, you're having a hard time, and what do you need? How can I help you? Just be very, very validating about what they're feeling. One other thought that came to my mind is, I've known a few individuals, adults, who have committed suicide, and what was striking to me with one young person was he was the happiest person in the world, presenting at a meeting that things were going on well. And then a couple months, probably a month later, he killed himself. Now he had a history of an attempt. So I've often heard that sometimes a person gets a boost of energy because they know that their pain is going to end. So any kind of like strange behavioral changes is what you really want to tune into. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next question is,
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
I just wanted to also say sometimes for the parents, having that direct communication about saying things like, do you want to kill yourself? Have you thought about suicide? Sometimes that can be hard for them to hear too. And so, when I'm sorry, hi, I'm Sylvedra. I'm the director of mobile crisis from the Child and Family Guidance Center. Sometimes when I go out or my team members go out, we like to prepare the parent because it's an assessment not only for the child, but also for the parents. And so I like to let them know that having the direct, and everything that you guys said is accurate, having the direct communication about this makes it, it brings it to the table. So no, it's not something that's hiding anymore. It's not a secret. It's something that they can openly speak to you about. And that is important in moving forward and helping the child get the treatment and the support that they need. All set. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So next question, how do I find someone who specializes in working with kids, and what language should I use to encourage my child to try therapy?
So for the little ones, I can't stress enough, starting as early as you can, giving children a feelings vocabulary, helping them to be able to express themselves from a very young age. So it's not all of a sudden when they're in adolescence having all these feelings, they don't know how to sort it out. They've grown up knowing how to express these feelings. There are many resources for children and families. Trinity, are you guys going to be sending out any resource lists, like, so the Norwalk Partnership? Yeah, that's right. So everyone will be getting some resources, and really the idea is to normalize it for kids of no matter what age, that we all are encouraged to take care of our physical health. You go to the doctor, you get a physical, you do things to keep yourself healthy. Mental health should be approached in the same way. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It means you're being proactive. You're taking care of your mental health, which is equally as important as your physical health. And even talking to kids about how they're related, that how physically it makes you feel if you are not mentally doing well. So I think normalizing it, and then, giving the children whatever support. For teens, they may not want you there. They may want to go and, have some individual sessions without you, but being there to support and to say, it's not just you, we're going to go together as a family, or we're going to go, I'll go with you, as a parent-child relationship.
And kind of piggybacking off of Gail, when it comes to an adolescent, your adolescent is starting to develop, right? They're starting to gain an identity, mostly off of what they've been experiencing through, unfortunately, social media, things at school, peers, movies, anything that they may see. They're starting to build their identity, right? And most importantly is, what Gail was saying in terms of how to build that vocabulary around emotions. When you get into an adolescent brain, it becomes even more important to take that and really try to examine the cause and effect, right? Your adolescent is able to kind of identify why they're feeling lower or why they're feeling happy, right? So not just saying, hey, how are you feeling? Oh, I feel happy. Okay, great, let's move on. Actually take some time to maybe break it down and say, what is making you happy? What's one good thing that happened today? Or the opposite, you're feeling low. What's going on? What's one thing that's, making you feel a little bit lower? So you can put more vocabulary to the cause and effect to what the emotion is and the behavior that kind of elicits that. Because that also, again, going to being preventative, right? Being able to have this conversation will allow your child to have a learned behavior and learn what is going well, what's not going well, and maybe how to change what's not going well so they can be more preventative in the future around their emotions, right? So trying to build the next step in the cause and effect relationship in prevention with it.
Great. Seeing as I don't think anyone has anything else to add, I will just keep going. So what are some things that I can do at home to support my child and help them better cope with any mental health challenges?
So we kind of have touched on this through, the other questions, just really opening the lines of communication and not waiting until there's a problem or there's a crisis. If you have those lines of communication and your child sees that you're open to communicating, you're open to hearing their opinions, their thoughts, then when the tough stuff comes to talk about, they're going to be more apt to go to you. But if they kind of try it out with other things and they feel like they're not being heard, they're being shut down, then they're not going to be as apt to come to you, when it's the difficult stuff.
Yeah, just to add on to that, yeah, I think the golden rule is don't minimize what your child is saying. If you hear anything that sounds even remotely harmful, again, I'm thinking of the teens, but in a little child, it could be a picture or something that they're drawing. Be alerted to it. And I think to really rally the family and friends around that youth and kind of what I call the emotional bank of support, for, maybe it's Uncle John who enjoys time, especially with that child or youth. Bring him on board. We want to kind of wrap around ourselves, making sure that child feels love and, we want you here. We care about you. So anyway.
I think the most because I do work with a lot of adolescents, and those who are going through a difficult time, 9 times out of 10, that adolescent will report that they feel alone, right? So really what Donna is saying there is so, so important, just because it allows the child to know that they are not alone. Right. And knowing that their emotions, their feelings, maybe their thoughts is not something that is going to be criticized. Right. I think another big thing as a parent or a guardian is to really look at that line between criticize and providing feedback. Right. Because sometimes the child will internalize like criticism as a very negative kind of conversation where if you're giving and providing feedback, it allows, especially the adolescent, it allows the adolescent to have a voice and share what is on their mind, as well as you be able to provide the feedback, the guidance, the lesson in a way where the child can internalize it, ask questions about it, and then you can have a conversation around it instead of just kind of that criticizing, not really picking apart what's going well, but just what's going bad. So really, focus on the type of conversation. Is it a critical, like, are you criticizing, or are we having a feedback dialogue between the two of us? Just something to be a little bit mindful about.
And
If I
just,
may.
go ahead. Nope,
I was
go ahead.
going to say, it's also important to model appropriate responses to stress. And so, if your child can see, that you're taking a deep breath because you're feeling a little overwhelmed, it's something that they might, pick up on and do later, or it's something that you can teach them. Mommy gets stressed sometimes too, or daddy feels overwhelmed sometimes too. And this is one thing that I like to do. And then taking that moment and practicing it with them, and then letting them see you use it in the moment too. I think all of that can be helpful as well.
And I was just going to say, and as a parent of 3 teenage girls, I tend to do this myself, but we jump into problem solving mode. Oh, well, you should just this and this and this. And sometimes they just want to be heard. So giving them a chance to talk, and then asking the question, what do you need? What do you need from me? What do you need in general to what kind of help do you need? Because I think when we jump into problem solving, it makes them shut down a little bit.
My other thought I just wanted to add was the fact is that things change, everything changes. So what we feel today could be very different tomorrow. And I think sometimes in the life of a teen, that feeling seems endless. And we want to provide them with hope that, tomorrow could be a better day. Let's look at it, and let's see how we've dealt with other tough things that have passed us. Try to look at the positive, what they bring into this, and listen, hear it out.
And as parents, we have to deal with how quickly it changes, because you might have just been talking to them 2 weeks ago about the worst person on the planet, and 2 weeks later, they're best friends. So things are constantly changing and evolving in a teen's life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So if my child discloses thoughts of self-harm, ideation, or even a past attempt, or having a plan, what should my next steps be?
You want to take that? Go ahead.
I can jump
Yeah.
right in. So depending on, if the child has a therapist, it might be a conversation that I'd want to say you'd have with the therapist, depending on where the kid is. Like my first response wants to be, well, call 211 and see, have them assessed. But depending upon, where the child is important. So if the child is in school and, you find out this information, the school is likely to call 211. And then from there, we can, assess the child and try to connect the child to services. If the child is at home, the first step is to try to understand what's happening. What's going on, what has, made you feel this way, what has led you to get to this point. And, you may essentially call 211 as well, or if there's a therapist involved that might be able to see the child soon, that could be helpful. But I would definitely go with 211 as well, especially if there are no services involved. And I guess I'll just talk about a 211 response as well. So 211 kind of acts as 911 in that you call 211 and they dispatch to the nearest mobile crisis program. And if it's the Bridgeport area or the Norwalk area, that would be my team. And if it's overnight, because we're now a 24-hour service, it would also we also cover the whole region, so all the way to Greenwich. And so we'd come out within 45 minutes and we'd do an assessment on the child to really just get some information about what might be going on, what type of plan the child has, what the precipitating events are to these experiences and these feelings and these thoughts. And we'd assess whether or not the child can be safe. And then we talk to the parents and essentially ask some of the similar questions and get a feel for whether or not the parents have the ability to work with the child to keep the child safe. And sometimes the parents have great relationships and the parents are, really able to create a safe environment, lock up all the sharps, lock up all the knives and things of that nature. And they're able to create a sustainable safety plan that allows the child to feel safe and the parents, to keep the child safe. In some situations, that's not exactly possible. And then for one reason or another, whether or not the child can commit to safety, whether the parents think, I can help my child remain safe for the evening. And sometimes we need to send the child to the hospital to be further evaluated by a psychiatrist. And so those are ultimately the next steps that would occur. And then when 211 is involved and mobile crisis is involved, the team tries to connect the child and the family to services, whether that is an outpatient level treatment, whether that's just connecting to the school and having the child seen in school for a group or for an individual session weekly, or whether that's a next step up, meaning intensive level services such as an in-home intensive outpatient program or an IOP, which is an intensive outpatient program, or hospitalization. So hopefully that helps, and other people feel free to chime in as well.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that again, and I've been using that term a lot today, but I think everyone, we're intertwined, right? But kind of tying what Sylvandra was saying and what we were talking about before in terms of stigma. A lot of times, again, a teen will tell me that they're afraid to tell their parents because they don't want them to get mad, or they're afraid to go to the hospital because it's been built up in their mind that the hospital is a very negative place. Understandably, right? No one really wants to go to the hospital, but a lot of teens get a misconstrued message that the hospital is nothing but negative, right? So when you are having these conversations with your teen or your child, anyone really, really try to create an atmosphere where the hospital or an IOP or 211, all these services are in place to help, right? And provide hope instead of trying to utilize it as a negative or a scary place. So just kind of, again, try to keep that in mind as you talk to your child, as you talk to your adolescent around the help, the resources that are out there.
And just to kind of take the mystery out of what all of us as professionals, when someone is making suicidal statements, really what we're trying to do is determine what's the level of risk. So if someone says, I wish I were dead, but doesn't have a plan, we look at that as more of like passive. They have these thoughts, but they don't have an immediate plan to kill themselves, versus someone who says, I want to kill myself and I know there's medicine in my mom's medicine cabinet that I would use, and that's how I would do it. So that's what we're always, as professionals, when we say level of risk, and that's what we're looking at, is how likely is this teen to complete suicide or to try suicide, versus can they be safely, everyone wants the child to be kept at the lowest level of care possible or necessary. So if they can be maintained in the home, that's what everybody wants to try to do. And can we do that safely? As it was said earlier, can the parents participate in this and be able to keep them safe as well?
And I was just going to add to, I think Sylvandra probably said there's always the hospital emergency room. But just for parents to monitor those children as well, make sure that there is a trusted adult, seeing the child, and also removing any kind of risky items, firearms, for example, alcohol. People die of alcohol poisoning, drugs. I think Gail had mentioned that, any kind of drugs, things like Tylenol, and that kids tend to pick up, and just to continue to monitor and keep the house safe until they get to a place where they're getting that help.
And nowadays there are so many different things that can be utilized, from beauty products where the little shavers for your eyebrows, those can be used, pen caps can be used, nails can be used, you know, and there are some children that sometimes they're in a space where anything that I can find, I'm going to use, you know, and that really, you know, that's really telling, and that really determines, like Gail said, whether or not they can stay in the home, whether or not we can safety plan and keep them safe, or whether or not, you know, it's a passive thing and they're not so much of a safety risk. So definitely weighing the risk factors versus the protective factors.
Right, I'm just gonna keep going because some of them you've already taken. Should I let my child take the lead when discussing difficult topics such as like mental health, suicide, or like possible risk of crisis intervention?
So I think kind of like what we were talking about, it's fine to let them take the lead. If they're not going there, then you may need to push a little bit. So they might dabble and, you know, drop a little bit and then back off and then say, well, I don't want to talk about it. So really encouraging them to, if they can take the lead, allow them to take the lead. But if they're not necessarily, you know, talking about things and you're left feeling a little worried or that they haven't covered all your concerns, then you may have to take the lead to ask more direct questions.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And again, I think it goes back to the feedback, you know, having a feedback dialogue instead of a critical dialogue, you know, trying to, again, you know, create some space within you in terms of your emotional boundaries to allow your child to kind of have that exploration. Because again, you know, we all have our days where we're more stressed than others, right? So we want to make sure that if we're talking to our child about something very sensitive, that we look at ourselves too, right? And we make sure that our tone, our dialogue is going to be reflective, and we're going to meet our child where they are, right? Because that's what's important, is meeting them where they are so they can use their language around what they're feeling instead of us kind of dictating that. But I think, you know, again, like Gail said, it's important to really, if they're not going there, to try to figure out how to navigate that avenue where they could feel more comfortable going down there, that road.
I was also going to say, in terms of treatment, right? You want to just be mindful that it's going to take a while for them to actually develop a relationship with the therapist or their provider. So you don't want to, you know, have them say like, oh, I don't like, you know, after day one, I don't like my therapist, I'm not going back. Like, you want to actually kind of have that relationship build and to kind of see where it goes, because it's obviously going to take a while, especially with adolescents. And so if you have any concerns about, you know, even passive suicidal ideation and you take your child to therapy, I think it's really important to just be patient and let that happen.
And I look to the kind of the emotional circle of support, as Delphine is saying, that it could, you know, could be a coach that they feel a real affinity towards and feel really open and safe. It could be their LGBTQ community at school. It could be whom, you know, as I go back to Uncle John, whoever is that person's person. You want to activate that person so that your youth feels most comfortable. Because there's oftentimes I think there's a lot of shame attached to feeling this way. You know, they might not want to talk to their parents about, you know, I want to die. So who is it that can really reach their heart and they're not afraid to share?
Environment is very big too. I find, you know, maybe being able to have that conversation in a different environment, you know, maybe not in the bedroom or at the dinner table or in the kitchen, you know, really try to see if the environment is, you know, providing a space where your teen feels safe. I think is very important too, to also look at. And one more thing that we really try to, you know, when we were working with teens to try to do is the exercise, right? And the physical activity is huge, right? Because it will be able to elevate your team's mood by stimulating the production of endorphins, right? And endorphins are the natural substances in our brain, in our body, that help balances our stress and manages our pain, right? And I'm not saying that you have to force your teen to go to the gym, but as small as taking a daily walk, just getting the body moving will allow the body to naturally produce endorphins. That being said, if you do go on a walk with your teen, maybe that's a time and a place you can have one of those conversations, right? So you're kind of hitting you're hitting two stones there with trying to get both going on. So just remember, exercise is really important to producing natural endorphins and supporting higher levels of serotonin, right? Which is another substance that leads to positive mood and sleep.
And the only other last thing I would add is also to don't be afraid to, you don't know what you don't know. So if your teen is saying something to you and you don't know how to handle it or how to respond, you can say, this is really important. And I think we need to talk to someone about what we should do here, because you aren't a therapist. So you're not expected to know all the answers. So that could also be your segue to therapy. You can say, I want to help you. I don't really know how to help you. So I'm going to either talk to someone to get some advice, or let's go and talk to a therapist so they can help us together.
Okay. So for the sake of time, and I validate that we started like maybe 15 minutes late, I want to kind of have Silvadra briefly speak on more resources and then introduce Cassandra Lucian, who is the Wilton Teen Talk counselor, and then get into the questions that were submitted by those in the audience.
Okay. All right. Just to pronounce my name, it's actually Silvadra. It's okay. I get it. To kind of summarize the questions, my answers to the questions. So there's some questions about support and about parents learning about what to do. So resources, and then parents learning about what to do to support their children. And I think that for the support of the children, the internet is vast and it's big and it's wide. And there are already some key people that are involved with your child that could better support you. The child has a pediatrician. And so if there are some concerns that you have regarding your child's health and well-being and their mental health, you might want to start with the pediatrician, because 9 times out of 10, the pediatrician can give you resources for a therapist that might take your insurance, and that might be helpful. Also, the school is involved, right? The child attends school. And so you might want to talk to the child's school social worker or school counselor who might be able to support you in getting the child services as well. Sometimes there are school-based health centers, and there's a therapist usually in the schools that the child could see on a weekly basis or in a group, and that could be very helpful. For parents who are concerned about providers accepting their insurance, there is a number on the back of your insurance card that could provide you with some providers in the areas, and you just kind of look for the type of specialist you're looking for. And there's also Psychology Today that has a list of private therapists and it lists their insurances, and it lists their specialties. You get to see their faces, you get to see a breakdown of what type of services they provide and what their specialties and their clinical style is, and that can be helpful as well. In terms of, I think I've kind of gone through like what is to be expected from a 211 crisis assessment. We'll come out to the school, to the home, to the community. Sometimes we meet families in parks, sometimes in the doctor's office, restaurants, and we try really hard to make it a confidential assessment. So, we try to redirect from a restaurant if we had to, but if that's all we had, we'd absolutely do it. Again, as Gail said, and as everyone else on the panel has said so far, the main purpose is to try to assess for safety and to ensure that the child is not in imminent risk of harming themselves or others at the moment. And then we try to safety plan and create what we call a crisis plan that's created by the clinician, the parent, and the child, and that we could put together, and if implemented, the child will be able to remain safe. And sometimes we stay involved for up to 45 days and we connect the family to services, whether it be an outpatient level of care, and sometimes we can make a referral for that, or whether it's a higher level of care. As I mentioned before, sometimes there's programs that come into their home and it's more than one time a week. It could be 2 to 3 times a week because that's what the child requires. Or sometimes it's a partial hospitalization program or an intensive outpatient program, which basically means that the child needs a little bit more than once a week outpatient therapy. So they need a little bit more than going to an office once a week or seeing someone on a for a telehealth appointment one time a week, because I think it was Gail that mentioned, their functioning was a lot different than it is typically. So they were they were much farther away from their baseline. There's some questions about hospitalization as well. And so, and how that impacts school, right? And so if a child is deemed to need a hospitalization level of care, the child is receiving, the first part is they're keeping the child safe. So there was a concern about the child's safety in the home. And so they're keeping the child safe, they're exposing them to individual therapy, group therapy, they're helping them learn coping skills, and really trying to get a sense of, what the child's treatment needs are. And there are some concerns about, what happens with school during this time. Depending on how long the child is actually in the hospital, the child may receive, they may need to have their schoolwork brought to the hospital, or sometimes there are some programs. Oh my gosh, I'm wrapping up. There are sometimes programs that have, they'll have like a little school program within the hospital, and so the child can engage with that. But the one thing that we've seen is no matter what the case, the school, once the child is discharged, the school has always been helpful and willing to work with the family to get the child back on track, and that's really important. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And then Cassandra, if you want to jump in here.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Again, to Trinity, thank you for having me. So I did just want to take some time to talk about the Teen Talk program here at the high school. Teen Talk is a program through Kids in Crisis, which is here, and we are able to offer free support to the students here at the high school. The program is confidential. The students are able to come to my office. We discuss an array of topics, some of which was discussed today, and that could be peer issues, school issues, any issues in regards to their mental health. So depression, anxiety, self-harm, identity issues, if they're having some issues with their teachers, again, different peers, we are here and able to help them. If you have a teenager in the home and they are in high school and they're experiencing an issue, the Teen Talk program is here to help them. And I also would like to just speak about support, right? Because we were able to discuss that early on. And again, the program is here as a support to the students and to the parents as well. So you may have a teen in your home who you think that they just need some extra support, or they come to you and say, hey mom, hey dad, I am going through this issue, and you feel that they just need a support in the school. Please do not be afraid to reach out and to ask the school the type of support that is here to be able to work with them. I also have a team here that I work with, and we are all equipped to be able to help your child as best as we can. So please feel free to use the support that you have here at the school as well. Don't be ashamed, because that kind of has your child feeling ashamed sometimes as well. The more support that a family can have to make sure that their child is safe, and that they know that if they are able to get the support, talk about it, that we are here to be able to help them as well.
Great, thank you very much. And briefly, before we jump into questions, I also want to highlight the role of social services as well as youth services here in town. We are an additional support for any family or youth that would require mental health support or just has questions. We can discuss levels of care, suggest referrals to local levels of care, as well as answer questions as best as possible about insurance and other situations. For families that have financial need, social services has funding available to help families that would otherwise not be able to afford counseling. And the town also acts as an informational hub to supply information on other services in the region that may be helpful, some of which will be provided at the end of this presentation via the town website. And the town, of course, is not immediate crisis response. That would fall under, again, 211-988-911 if any of those numbers were ever called. All right, so now I'm going to jump into, and I see in the chat that Kids in Crisis also posted their hotline, which is helpful should anyone want that. I'm going to jump into the questions that were submitted via the people that pre-registered. So the first one is, I would like to hear suggestions about whether and how parents should talk to their teen about their own experiences with mental health struggles, especially around suicide ideology and past attempts.